Hello, Emilie.
Hello, Jeff.
Hello, happy viewers. We are a team of senior and junior researchers and one student. We belong to different institutes, just like you can see with the many logos on the bottom of these slides. We are working on biology, math, and computer sciences.
Today, we are going to tell you a story about a project about plant growth modeling using PDEs. PDEs belong to the family of continuous math models. In the project, the idea was to test neural networks to identify the right set of PDEs, that is, partial differential equations.
We are newbies at this multidisciplinary topic, so we faced a lot of tricks during the project, which led us to set a scientific workflow.
We hope it will help to avoid some pains and turn it into a treat. First, what do biologists say about plants and plant growth?
Now, first, plants are living organisms, and while animals are made of a few organs having well-identified and distinct function, think about liver, brain, stomach, legs, eyes. On the other hand, plants are made of a lot of similar organs, leaf, shoots, root, fruits, with restricted set of functions, mechanics, hydraulics, photosynthetics, and so on. Along their lives, plants never stop to create new organs, so their size is constantly changing. Among plants, there are many species. Some of them are small, some are big, some are light or shadow tolerant, some are annual or perennial. Some can stand dry or hot weather, some other cannot.
And if we want to represent plant growth, the spatial position of the biomass along time may be a good way.
It's an expert task to study plant growth. They have many ways to do so, and especially to collect data. For instance, before digital tools, they used to draw plants like you see in the drawing of Francis Allais. Pictures may also be useful to make identification of organs, like on the picture of Yves Caraglio, where he counted the number of growth units. You see the red arrows. Growth units are a good proxy of plant age. Generally speaking, experts are collecting data that are measured on real plants. Branch number, plant height, diameter, length, number of leaves, and so on, a lot of them. All those measurable variables are called traits. And those traits may be organized and mapped on a numerical tree, just like MTGs you see a picture of on the late picture. Nowadays, new technologies like LiDAR scanning are available to take 3D snapshots of real plants that can then be digitized for further measurements. And just the way there are many ways to measure plant growth, there are also many ways to model plant growth. Anometries and statistics are great tools to synthesize collected data and to extract correlations between traits. This will allow to describe plant with a restricted set or limited set of data. Now, if you focused on plant mechanism, you may use process-based models. These models use extremely simplified plant structure representations, and they are well suited for agronomic applications. Now, if you map on this process-based model some plant structure based on mockups, you will construct what we call functional structural process model. They are accurate, very accurate, but most of the time those models are very heavy time and memory consumers, and thus Simulating a whole plot with this kind of model can be very difficult. A good alternative for modeling at higher scales is to use continuous mathematical models. We will go deep into details in the next slide, and Emilie, you are a specialist on that. Can you tell us a little about those strange things?
PDEs are not that strange. As I said at the beginning, they belong to the family of continuous mathematical models, and they are able to describe the spatio-temporal dynamics of the plant biomass. In the slide, you can see an example of such an equation that has been settled to simulate the dynamics of roots. This model is called the C-root. Here the unknowns is U, and it denotes the biomass of root. The goal of this equation is to describe how the roots behave into the space and through time. And since this dynamics is quite complex, it's not possible to have a simple expression, so we express the dynamics thanks to partial derivatives. This technique was historically used in physics, like in mechanics, in fluids, in electromagnetism, water and soil transfer. The formalism is not dependent on the scale, which is it's a good advantage. And if we succeed to find a PDE for plant growth, it will be then easy to couple it with physical models like soil and water transfer models, temperature and wind and so on.
So Emilie, you've been talking to us about this C-roots model. So on the top of this slide, we see a simulation with a pure structure model of a root system. This simulation is rather accurate, but it's very time and memory consuming, and we don't think about simulating more than one root system at a time.
Yes, and what I've said before is PDEs are not dependent on the scale, so it's a rather good alternative if we want to model many plants in a same plot. And here, what we've done from the structural description of the roots, we compute the apex density, which is the movie on the bottom left corner, and from those data we calibrate the C-root model, and we obtained the movie on the left-hand side by simulation. And we are rather happy to see that the simulation given by the C-root model is in accordance with the data we used before. Finally, there are many ways to assess plants, and there are many modeling approaches. To make it a little more clear, we can use compound frame to characterize the modeling techniques. Kaufman suggests to characterize the modeling techniques by using a graph having two axes. One stands for the use of data, and the second one stands for the use of scientific knowledge.
As an illustration of this frame, we can put what we previously mentioned about modeling techniques on plants. These are the blue drawing. So on the data axis, you can see traits, you can see images, you can see LiDAR, and on the scientific knowledge, you can see PDE, ODE, ordinary derivative equation, or graphs, and you can also see the different functional structural model, or process-based model.
Hey, by the way, don't you see there is an empty zone on the upper right corner?
Right, you're right. And Karpat was fulfilling this empty zone and proposed to build models that combine theory and data in a balanced way.
And he called it theory-guided data science models. In physics, this kind of approach have already been introduced, particularly in fluid dynamics. Based on the theory, one can assume that the dynamics can be simulated thanks to a PDE satisfied by U, the unknown, like on the equation shown on the top of the slide. At the same time, through data modeling process, we can measure values of U at some space and time points, which gives us a set of data that we call U hat. One way to combine theory and data is to find the parameters beta I of the PDE given the data. To do so, the neural network seems to be a good alternative.
So note that on this slide we are defining Fi, that are derivative terms, and beta I, that are weights on the derivative terms on the equation we would like to discover. We will use the same notation in the next slide.
That techniques of combining theory and data using neural networks is quite new, less than 10 years, as you can see on the references we've listed in this slide. Different kind of neural network architectures have been tested for this application, mainly feed-forward neural networks and convolutional neural networks.
Now we have been seeing that few papers are dealing with real data. Most of the time data are simulated. And for newbies like us, the availability and the legibility of the code is also a criteria for choosing a method rather than another.
All the approaches detailed in these 3 papers have their specificity, but they all follow a standard workflow that we are going to detail in the next slide. In these 3 papers, all the methods follow the same 3 steps. First, we compute more values than what was measured. This is the extrapolation step. For this purpose, one can train a neural network and use it as a universal approximator. Of course, there may be many other ways to achieve this task. Second, given the extrapolated values of U, we compute the Fi values on many points at a user-selected scale, usually on a regular grid. This is the derivation step. Third, we compute the weights beta I by training a neural network on the set of F tilde at every selected point. This is the identification step. Let us now go into detail of each step.
For extrapolation step, if we choose to compute extrapolation thanks to a neural network, there is at least 3 standard key points, all dealing with neural network using. First, the neural network architecture. Second, the design of a loss function. This is the equation you see on the top of the slide. And next, the algorithm to minimize that loss function, that is to properly tune the neural network to predict the good values. This neural network that compute extrapolation, we will call it XNet. And after good work, it will be able to predict U value for any X and T input in the space and across time. So it will be able to compute the U tilde for what we've been choosing for X and T, that is mainly done along a grid.
Okay, well, if I understand well, many expert choices have to be done.
You're right, expert again. Now for derivation. There are also many choices to do. It is important to know that results for the different tools are not exactly the same, and so the choice of the tool we've been using is really not even.
Again, it's an expert task to do that choices. And in the papers we have read, we did not find any clear justifications of the choices of the derivation method. For the identification step, the key points mainly concern the choice of the partial derivative candidate terms and the choice of the loss function and its minimization.
Not to talk about the design of the neural network that is due for only extremely smart persons.
For all these three steps, there are many expert-based choices to do that are related to neural networks.
Now, when applying this modeling workflow to plant growth, we realize that there are also many other specific issues that are mainly related to the fact that plants are living organisms.
For example, many different things happen at different time scales. For instance, the photosynthesis occurs on a minute basis, while the growth occurs at least on a week scale.
Also, two plants belonging to the same species look globally the same, but if you go into detail, you will see that they are not exactly the same. Think about using two seeds to grow two trees, for instance, poplar trees. You will get trees that you will know that they are poplar. They will look globally the same, but if you count the number of branches, if you measure how high it is, and it will not be exactly the same. That is what we call intraspecific variability.
On top of that, there are many different growth strategies among all the plant species. This is intraspecific strategy variabilities. For example, some plant species like to grow under shadow, and some others like to grow under full sun. Just think about sunflowers.
And then, since plants are living bodies, there is a huge variability that is linked to where the plant is living. How good is the soil, how much water they can get, what is the temperature, how much human there are around it, how much pest, what disease it can stand.
In a word, plants are really complex systems. There are many processes involved in plant growth.
Physiologists study photosynthesis.
Mechanicians study how plants stand up.
Hydraulicians look at fluxes through cells.
Agronomists look at fruit productions.
But we see that there is very few studies linking all this knowledge together into a specific, lonely modeling approach.
For each specialties, there are many different kinds of data. They are massively collected. For a very long time. And look at the table. We see that physicians have been deriving PDEs for quite a long time, at least 300 years. For plants, it is rather new, around 50 years.
So, we were inspired by these recent works done on physics to extract PDEs from data with neural networks. And we would like to apply this idea to plant growth.
And since we had previous experience on the simulation of root systems simulated by PDE, we already have some ideas about the main issues. At that time, we designed a PDE based on an analytical approach where we linked the standard physical operators to growth dynamics. But we are not sure about the relevancy of the formula, the choice of the operators. And we face difficulties to give a biological meaning to the terms with respect to their expert knowledge.
Now, there are new technologies that are able to collect a lot of even more data. So everything seems to be ready to test mixed data and theory modeling approaches, and we did it in a framework of a project which name is Deep to PDE.
And it was founded by Sirad.
So, until now, we were in the beauty of the theory. Now, during the project, we faced the dark reality and the tricks into many topics.
First, we thought about collecting data thanks to LiDAR scanning. We work on cocoa tree plots on agroforestry systems. Cocoa tree lives some tenths of years. Obviously, we did not have such a time to get growth time sequences. Is it possible to reconstruct time sequences by scanning different trees at different ages? This might be a good subject for PhD at HAMAP. Moreover, data processing LiDAR images is a big burden because of occlusions, because of segmentations, and so on.
So, to make it more simple, we decided for this project to work with simulated mockups, but we kept in mind that it will be a first bias for the rest of the work. Now, second, trees are 3D objects, so obviously the PDEs has to be with X, Y, and Z direction, that is 3D PDEs.
But handling 3D PDEs is a tedious technical task that requires big computers and a big set of terms in the PDE.
So we decided to work in 2D using 3 slices.
And third, just like we said before, PDE extraction with a neural network is a very new research field, and due to our lack of expertise in this technique, we decided to use existing works previously mentioned.
So that is simplification. In real term, what did we do?
So, as a warm-up, we tried to redo the works described in the papers we mentioned above. And we realized that there is a lot of tricks to properly tune the neural networks, even if the structure was previously fixed by specialists. We had to handle thresholds, initial guess, loss functions. We had to recreate data. And since the 3 papers give a slightly different implementation, we were not able to properly compare them together.
But on any free method, we already see a strong impact of the derivative computation. In fact, all those methods are not really user-friendly.
And next, what did we do?
What do we do? Now we tried to go back to plant growth. That was our first goal. And just like we told you, we were going from 3D to 2D using slices of plants. And for this purpose, we assume that plants are symmetrical objects. So we can take a slice of the biomass that is along plants going through the center of the plants, so to get maps, images, just like you see on the right image of this slide. Prosit. Now, the XNet network that we were using according to what Berg and Istrom did gave a very good approximation of the biomass, but only at the first order. You see the orange curve at the right top image really good fits the blue curve that traces the real biomass change along the simulated plant. What we see is that this slope forgot about what happened during seasons on the plant, where growth takes place only in spring and leaves are falling down in winter.
Maybe by improving the architecture of XNext, we might be able to improve the accuracy of the extrapolation and get the second order. This raises the questions about every choices that has to be done to constrict and tune the XNet, like the numbers of layers, the number of and the kind of nodes, etc. Next comes the derivation step. Here I wanted to show how it looks like graphically. In the bottom part of the slide, you can see the derivative of u with respect to t, and on the top part of the slide, you can see the derivative with respect to x. The darker the cells are, the higher the value of the derivative is, and we can notice that most of the variations occur at the border, at the edge or at the border of the tree. At this stage, we don't really know if the result we've obtained is true or not, and we might need help from experts to tell us if, biologically speaking, it is true or not.
What a pity.
Next, for the identification step, we assume that the form of the PDE is known a priori. Here, in the example we show today, the PDE is supposed to have the form written on the first equation. Then, by training the perceptron, we find some values for the parameters beta, and we dropped off some negligible terms, and we finally get the equation on the bottom of the slide.
Now the big tricky questions are: first, is this the right PDE? And second, how to interpret this PDE? Does the different terms of the equation have a particular role that express something that is happening in the plant? Here is all the more difficult that we saw that the quality of these results strongly depends on the computing of the derivative, and we are rather embarrassed with that.
And moreover, we didn't mention that the PDE comes with boundary conditions and initial conditions, and it has a huge influence on the dynamic of the system. Changing the boundary or the initial conditions can highly change the simulated dynamic.
So, as a newbie, I would immediately ask, okay, we are using neural networks. Why not to put boundary and initial conditions into the neural network as an output, as an input? I don't know, but once again, there is a lot of further study to carry on.
Yes, that's true. Okay, and at the beginning of our project, the method appeared to us as really, really promising, but after some practices, we revealed all the tricks. So, we took a step behind and looked at the general features.
Just like we said before, we have been identifying 3 steps: extrapolation, derivation, and identification. We will go into more details concerning the general feature of each step.
For the extrapolation step, we noticed that there are a specificity on the processing that are directly dependent on the available data. In physics, experiments are built on few sensors sampling at high frequency. This mainly requires spatial extrapolation.
For plant simulation, it is exactly the opposite. We got a lot of data at each time, but we still have only a few time-step measurements. So we need extrapolation through time. Now, Thinking about LiDAR, look at those images that show a cocoa tree at different ages. Is this possible to reconstruct a plant chronosequence from the scanning of different plants at different ages? And not to mention likely tricks on extrapolation and those kinds of chronosequences.
Good question. And by the way, why is it so tricky to make an extrapolation?
Okay, that's rather simple, but I think it is worth to say it again. Let's say we got 3 measurement points and we want to extrapolate values around it. We got many solutions to do so. What is the better one?
This is a tricky choice for numericians indeed. They might be helped by experts in this task.
Okay. For the next steps, the derivatives are computed from the extrapolated values. It is obvious to realize that extrapolation choice have a great impact on the results, not to mention that there are many available tools to compute the derivatives.
And remember, we saw that the derivative computation method is not even. Numericians may ask about error estimates.
Yes, and given what we've done already, we become very, very cautious and we foresee further influence of the choice we are doing at that step for the next step.
And once again, experts may help in evaluating the relevancy of the derivatives. And just like we said before, there are a lot of technical tricks to overcome. And just like we guessed, the identification step is strongly dependent on the previous steps, since the derivative explicitly appear in the last function formula, as you can see on the bottom of the slide in red in the formula.
Good remark. Now that we are convinced that all steps depends on the previous one, identification depends on derivation, and derivation depends on extrapolation. And what about the extrapolation step?
Well, we are convinced that this step depends on the data collection step. And this data collection step appeared to us as a crucial step that has to be included in the workflow.
Unfortunately, we think that it is not possible to generalize the data collection step. It depends on the process we want to study. For instance, suppose we are counting the number of apex, that is end of branches, on a growing plant. We do that, we do a modeling. This will result on a pure structural modeling with no functional processes.
Now, if we want to implement causal modeling, one should also measure the temperature, the soil water content, and nutrients, and so on, because we know that those variables have an impact on the plant growth.
And the experts, the people that know plants, also know how to measure them depending on their knowledge and their knowledge about the dynamic we want to model. Experts will design the acquisition protocols, number of measures that have to be done, frequencies of the measure, kind of sensors, and so on.
Concerning the data collection, let us figure out if we faced this reality. Let's assume this curves stand for the real phenomena having a general behavior combined with high frequency signals.
Now suppose we got 3 measurement points on this phenomenon. What can we do with that? We can do this kind of extrapolation with line segments, or we can do this that is much closer to the real phenomenon, but it is obvious to see that we will never be able to catch the second order functions on that phenomenon. Now, think about a lot more measurement. Depending on the time we do the measurement, the shape of the extrapolation may be very, very different. And we can also see that to catch the second order, we'll have to do a lot of measurement. So there is a lot of possibilities to collect data, but the data collection is very important.
It is very important, and at the same time we have many constraints on this step. We already said that in physics there are few data.
And for plants growth simulation, we lack of time step measurements.
And we show that numerical methods require accurate data.
Now, for sure, it's possible to increase the number of sensors and to increase also the data collection frequency.
Okay, but it will at the same time bring additional cost that we might not stand. So we have to find compromises.
Always compromises.
Well, to make a summary, we raised 4 main steps for the workflow that extracts PDE from data.
First, data collection that requires accuracy, just like we said before. This task falls both for numericians and experts.
Second, due to missing data and in order to compute the derivatives, we perform an extrapolation. We compute additional values from the raw data. Many methods are available. In particular, here we used a neural network we called XNet. This task falls to numericians with a little help from experts.
Third, the derivation consists in computing derivatives of different operators from the extrapolated data. Many methods are available, and it's the numerician task to do the right choices for this task.
And fourth, the identification computes the weights of the terms of the PDE. It uses a perceptron. We still face difficulties for the interpretation of the results, but before this, there are also stability and convergence issues.
All those difficulties may result from error accumulation and propagation from one step to another.
Studies has to be done to assess the error behavior.
So, as a conclusion, we look at the sedition workflow as a guideline for people who want to go from data to PDEs.
Okay, by looking at the 4 steps, we can see where the experts can play a role in a workflow. The workflow may be used by experts once the workflow is set up. It may be used by the expert to process data coming from contrasted experiments. The PDE output may change from an experiment to the other. This change on the PDE form may help the experts to better understand the role of the different terms in the PDE.
For modelers, the contribution of this workflow is more or less the same, but on a more technical point of view. For instance, once calibrated, this workflow may make it possible to test a lot of different operators and to numerically test their role into the output dynamics.
The sedition workflow is a multidisciplinary approach that tackles many angles of view linked to the modeling of complex systems.
And thanks to this workflow, we hope it is more easy to structure this multidisciplinary task of modeling complex systems.
The 4 steps may help modelers not to forget or to avoid critical tasks that are important for the quality of the final result.
And finally, this tool can also help us to bring together researchers from different fields around a single modeling for a specific phenomenon. We thank you for watching this video.
And we will be pleased to answer your question, so feel free to contact us by email.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.